Good morning. Good morning. I am Darryl King. I'm the head of underwriting here at ICOR, and today I wanted to go over a few things. This is going to be more of a discussion. I'm going to go over some topics and whatnot that I see in underwriting, along with some changes that are coming down the pipe with with the agencies we deal with, meaning Fannie, Freddie, FHA, and so forth. I'm going to start off with what I'm going to call some reminders as it pertains to the IRLA, or the 1003 as we know it. There's a couple of sections that I want to make sure that we're paying close attention to. First thing is we definitely need to show a full 2-year history of residence and employment. Not 1.5, not 1 3/4. We want to show 2 years. Not just because it's required, but everything that I'm going to talk about today helps to strengthen the loan. When strengthening a loan, it helps to mitigate risk or the shortcomings of the loan. So if we have it strong up front, then as we get through the meat and potatoes of the loan, we can have a firmer foundation. Now, in that vein, if one of the borrowers, one or two or however many, is living rent-free or don't have a primary housing expense, please know that we are going to need a LOE from the people who they are living with, whether it's parents, in-laws, or whatever. Let's make sure that we're proactive in getting those things because, essentially, while not every investor will require it, all it takes is one. So what I am talking about today is really going to encompass, the whole scope of our lending sphere. So, to that point, if they are living rent-free, we want to definitely provide a LOE of some kind of context of who and how they are living rent-free. Now, if they are renting, please make sure that we get an amount for the rent. That is going to be helpful because, things that are really starting to garner a lot of attention is things like payment shock and their ability to handle, payments, not just from a shock perspective, but just to show that they are handling debt. We have been conditioned from investors for that. Now, the other thing is this is all part of the 1003 is residency. We want to make sure that if they are not permanent residents, if they're not U.S. citizens, that we ask for the residency docs up front. Now, one thing that has come up, and we're still dealing with an investor on this, is we have a borrower who has a TPS that's under temporary protective status. So they came in from, I'll just say, El Salvador. Well, because of that, their ability to stay is automatically renewed. However, investors are requiring us to have an updated EAD. So regardless of what their classification is, whether it's 812, 810, whatever the case may be, if we have someone who has a TPS, please make sure that they have applied for, and we have some sort of time frame, if they don't already have it, as to when they will receive that updated card, because they are requiring that. You also want to verify that their identification is current as well. That has come up before. Now there different municipalities are allowing different types of verification or updated identification. It can be electronic, it can be written or in a card or whatever, but just inspect what you expect, guys. Make sure that you are looking to verify that date is good. Now, changing speeds a little bit. When we run DU or LP, now if it's a first-time home buyer, let me just put it like this. If it's a first-time home buyer, make sure you are looking to see if they need to take the first-time home buyer education courses. Because that certification, we won't be able to fund it or sell that loan without proof of that. And really and truly, it needs to be dated before the note date. So your processing partner, your operational partner will let you know, but I do want to make sure that you guys are in tune with that as well. So if you have a first-time home buyer, or somebody in the transaction is a first timer, just make sure that you are verifying that they don't need to take the homeowner's course. Now, this part right here has to do with credit. When you're reviewing the credit and you see that they have some derogatories, I'm going to say within the last 2 to 3 years, they cannot owe anything. It can be charged off or it can be paid or whatever. But preemptively, if you see some negatives on the credit, go ahead and ask for a letter of explanation. The reason why I say that is not necessarily that I'm going to submit that letter of explanation, but in a weak loan, if I can put in on my 1008, which is a transmittal, what our investors review, me summarizing the loan, if I can put an episode or something around any of those derogatories, it's going to help to mitigate other potential risks within the loan. So again, you may not be conditioned for it, but getting to know and knowing that about your loan is only going to help us, down the road. Again, that might not be something that that we have to send in as a letter of explanation. I might not condition for it, but as you know your loan and you speak with your operational partner, if there are some derogatories, preemptively, let's go ahead and get that get that letter of explanation. All right. So I had sat in on a couple of webinars in the last couple of weeks with different agencies, and I summarized some of the information that I did get. So what I'm getting ready to talk about now, first I'm gonna jump into FHA, but when I speak in terms of FHA or any of the agencies, please incorporate this mindset throughout all of them. This is universal information while it might only be required by one. First thing let's talk about is bankruptcies. Now, the case number on the FHA loan has to be at least 2 years after the date of the discharge. So knowing when your bankruptcy discharge, just know you got to have that date has to be 2 years before we put an before we request an FHA case number. Couple of caveats: you want to look for reestablished good credit, or you want to really make sure that they chose not to incur any new credit obligations. That's the best case scenario. But even if they have and they've established some good credit practices after the bankruptcy, that is going to be good. And trust and believe that's something that's going to go on that transmittal as I prop up the benefits of the loan. Now, if there's an elapsed period of less than 2 years, but no less than 12 months, it may be still acceptable if the borrower can show. If the borrower can show that the bankruptcy was caused by extenuating circumstances beyond the borrower's control. Now, divorce is not an extenuating circumstance, but say they were self-employed and their business took a hit for some, I don't want to say catastrophic, for some serious reason, that can be an extenuating circumstance. But what I would encourage you to do in a case like this, reach out to me and let's talk about, what the potential extenuating circumstances are. Now, this is a period of less than 2 years, but greater than at least 12 months. And then, of course, we need to show that the borrower has since exhibited a documented ability to manage their financial affairs in a responsible manner. Now, that's, kind of the same as reestablishing good credit. But the key element is if it's less than 2 years, we do want to show an extenuating circumstance. So that being said, don't disqualify it if it's under 2. Just make sure that we got work to do if it is. That was for Chapter 7. Chapter 13. At the time of the case number assignment, it has to be at least 12 months of the payout period under the bankruptcy has elapsed. So the borrower's payment performance has to have been satisfactory, and all required payments have been made on time, and the borrower has received permission from the bankruptcy court to enter into the transaction. Okay, so again, we're talking about someone who's in an open bankruptcy, open 13. They're paying it. They've been in it at least 12 months. All their payments are documented on time. we definitely need to get approval from the bankruptcy court to make sure that they can take on new debt. Now, we will need the bankruptcy discharge documentation to verify all debts that were in charge, and that's just your bankruptcy schedules. Know that we're going to need that regardless, 7 or 13. We do want to have the full bankruptcy schedules, and we also want to show that the events that led to the bankruptcy are not likely to reoccur. All right. So chapter 7s and 13, 7s, you want to have 2 years. If in fact it's less than 2, but more than 12, we want to show that the bankruptcy was caused by extenuating circumstances beyond the borrower's control, and that borrower has since exhibited a documented ability to manage their financial affairs in a responsible manner. All right. So now while I'm on this, I don't want to call it negative, but these are the more derogatory tips. In foreclosures and deed in lieu of a foreclosure, a borrower is not eligible for a new FHA loan if the borrower had a foreclosure or deed in lieu of foreclosure in the 3-year period prior to the date of the FHA case number. So what I just gave you was the foreclosure look back period, 3 years, okay, prior to the date of the case number assignment. This 3-year period begins on the date of the deed in lieu or the date the borrower has transferred ownership of the property to the foreclosing entity or designee. Now, that is the date that the property went to sale and they transferred ownership, not the date that the foreclosure was filed. It distinctively says that 3-year period begins on the date of the deed in lieu or date the borrower has transferred ownership of the property to the foreclosing entity. Now, it does have a caveat that we may grant an exception to the 3-year requirement if the foreclosure was a result, again, of documented extenuating circumstances that were beyond the control of the borrower, such as a serious illness, death of a wage earner, and we can prove that the borrower has reestablished good credit since the foreclosure. I just gave you 2 extenuating circumstances, guys, so let that sink in, such as a serious illness that curtailed their ability to earn or the death of a wage earner. Those are 2 acceptable extenuating circumstances. All right. So moving on, derogatory credit. With the exception of current delinquent mortgage debt, FHA does not automatically deny loans with what can be considered as major derogatory debt. Overall credit history is considered excluding medical collections. Now, on revolving accounts, we must include any payments made more than 90 days after the due date. This is considering derogatory, or 3 or more payments more than 60 days after the due date. So in looking at that credit, again, you're going to analyze their payment history. If you see some that are 90, that is going to be considered as major derogatory debt, and any 60 after the due date, a combination of 3 or more payments more than 60 days. Now, this goes back to what I was saying initially when we talk about LOEs for derogatory credit. If you see something like it, it doesn't disqualify, but we must address it. Okay, and then by addressing it, obviously, it helps to strengthen the loan, accordingly. Keep in mind that the borrower's debt does exhibit, keep in mind that if the borrower's debt does exhibit derogatory debt, we can consider in some cases where the derogatory was, again, the result of extenuating circumstances. FHA's guidance on reviewing loans with derogatory debt factors 3 things mainly, and this is including collections, charge-offs, and judgments. The 3 things are the borrower's obvious disregard for financial obligations, the inability to manage debt, and extenuating circumstances. Inability to manage debt, your debt ratio is good, but your credit's bad. There's a problem. Okay. Disregard for financial obligations, same deal. Your income is good. You've been on your job for 5-10 years, but your bills are paid poorly. These are things that FHA is definitely going to look at. So we want to have some sort of extenuating circumstance. Keep in mind that extenuating circumstances is defined as non-recurring events that are beyond the borrower's control that result in a sudden, significant, and prolonged reduction in income or a catastrophic increase in financial obligations. So it can work both ways. It can be, they lose their job, or they, came across or was faced with a huge bill. All right, so that summarizes kind of things that I had reviewed on with the last FHA webinar. Now, before I get into the other, I do want to give you guys a chance to see if you have any questions based on what I've talked about so far, especially in the FHA world. If so, unmute and speak up.
Hey Daryl, it's John. For the derogatories for like the charge off, the collections, and the revolving, it was 90 days or more for the considered major derogatory, correct?
Correct. Major derogatory, any payment that's made 90 days after the due date, or 3 or more payments more than 60 days after the due date. So if you got 3 times 60, is just as bad as a 1 times 90.
What's the seasoning period for that? Is that like a year since, or is it like within the last 6 months?
Yeah, FHA doesn't give a definitive, this can only happen in the last 12 months or anything. But I will tell you, when doing the layers of risk, the way it's been reviewed, especially in the test case world, is they're looking to see if there's a history or a tendency. If that happened a year ago and they've since, they've opened new credit or they've been perfectly paid after that, then we can tie it to an event, so that goes your extenuating circumstance. So they don't even say, even if it's recent, it doesn't want to, if you had a judgment in the last 90 days that you're disqualified, they don't say that, but we got to have a good reason and we can document it. If documented is typically going to be, like I said, your extenuating circumstances.
Okay, and that follows under like a manual underwrite?
No, not necessarily. This wasn't, these are manual rules. These are FHA rules. Now, I would tell you, pardon me, DU is going to dictate if in fact how FHA is going to really look at it. Okay, now if it is manual, you mean we get a refer eligible, but my debt ratios are in line, then I have to document that thoroughly. But a lot of times, if in fact we get an approved eligible and we still have those, all I need to do really is give an explanation in, said on my transmittal. So DU is going to be the guide when it comes to this. You're refer eligible or you're approved eligible. Refer, again, guys, if my debt ratios, let's say 40/50, I can do, even if it's a refer, we can go manual, but we have to have compensating factors, and we can talk about that, as a sidebar. But, to your point, it doesn't necessarily dictate on the manual.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Great question, man. Great question. How about anyone else before we move on? Yes. Okay. Okay. So Javier just mentioned something that we had recently ran into. It's the job stability. Now, whenever a borrower has a second job, they have to have been on that job for 2 years. That second job for 2 years, or not that particular job, but they've had to have worked part-time for the last 2 years. Not a gap, not 1 year they worked part-time, they did in 2 years, and now they're working part-time again. They have to have 2 consecutive years of part-time employment. Now, the income is going to be subject to their current job, but we do need to show that history.
Is that FHA only? Oh, sorry about that. Sorry.
No. That's job gaps. This is a general situation because all agencies, they are requiring 2 years 2 years part-time employment in order to use that income.
Has that always been a thing?
No, not at all. And again, okay, let me clarify that. When I first started talking, I did say that we do have overlays from specific lenders. And what I typically do is I try to make it across the board. Now, of course, if you do have a case where we can create a special circumstance, then I will. But our major investor does require 2 years, 2 years part-time history in order to use the part-time income.
Got it.
What was the other part?
With no gap.
Just the job stability. With no gap. And the same thing with job stability, guys. If in fact they've been working, they've been off for a while, or they have jumped around with a whole lot of jobs and then there's gaps and stuff, job stability is very important. Anything, you can stitch almost anything together with a good explanation, and there has to be one. But be cognizant, if you're taking that application and you see they've been here 6 months, didn't work for 3, they've been here 7 months, didn't work for 2. When you see stuff like that, we have to address it. It could be because of illness, could be because of COVID. We're still, in the reverberations of those COVID restrictions and the problems associated with it. Just keep in mind, guys, if you see something, say something. That way we're all on the same page at the same time. Because I'd hate for a loan to come to me and you've already set an expectation, with your borrower, and then I have to, put up a roadblock or put you in the slow lane when you was in the fast lane. So, I just want to make sure that you guys are inspecting, what you expect in that aspect. All right, so, this is another, now I'm getting ready to talk about income for a second. Now, those of you who have done loans with self-employed borrowers, FHA and Freddie Mac, they look at that income differently. FHA requires liquidity. What is liquidity? If you're looking at the tax returns on the 1065 or 1120, there's a Schedule L. That Schedule L is what breaks down the liquidity, how much money the company has or they reported during that tax year, the cost of goods and services, and the net amount. That's just a rough explanation. Typically, Freddie Mac does not require a liquidity calculation. However, our investors are requiring that. So Freddie Mac does not typically require liquidity calculation for S Corp and 1065 borrowers. However, our investors and Freddie Mac do expect us to verify that liquidity exists when using that income to qualify. When the corporations have the Schedule F completed, we can do the calculation manually using our income worksheet. However, I found in the last few self-employed borrower loans that they have not completed Schedule L. So I have to resort to alternate methods that includes review of balance sheets, in addition to the profit and loss statements and business bank statements for the last 2 months at a minimum. What am I looking for? On a business bank statement, and even if they run their business not Schedule C, even if they run their business through a personal account, or let's see, they do their personal expenses through the business, that business account for the last 2 months, I am looking for business related deposits. Okay. So if your P&L, I'm using round numbers, your P&L says they average $5,000 a month, and that's what their income is based on the P&L is $5,000 a month, then I need to show net deposits that can substantiate not just that $5,000 a month, but any of the cost of goods. So anytime, even if it's Freddie Mac, while they don't require a liquidity calculation, that we are required to make sure the liquidity exists. Now, tax returns, tax returns can be kind of intimidating to review. And I'm going to do a class. My next class is going to be on tax returns. And I'm actually going to go through the calculations just using our worksheet. I will tell you that for all of our non-Schedule C borrowers, whether it's S Corp or corporation, we do use a third party to calculate and validate those returns. And they rep and warrant that they will follow each agency guideline to doing that. So those are for the complex returns. But I tell you, what's really beneficial is for you guys to know how to move around in a tax return, and that's what I'm going to work with you guys on. Now, conversely, if you have any loans right now where you have a self-employed borrower with tax returns, I don't have a problem with doing a one-off and going through that with you guys, because again, knowledge is power. And I really want you guys to be able to at least know where, potential flag may be raised, or where you need to ask a couple more questions. So please do not hesitate to know that. Now, this, that verifying liquidity on a Freddie Mac loan when it's not necessarily required, that was born from a post-closing issue with one of our major investors. So, and they reverted back to a part in the Freddie lending guide where it does state that even though it's not required to have a liquidity calculation, we do need to verify that sufficient liquidity exists. So, to summarize, liquidity is the money left over after the bills are paid. We need to make sure that they have some. All right. Now, which one is this one? Okay. Here, this is a webinar that I attended, and it really refreshed on how and the changes that Freddie Mac is doing as it pertains to borrowers with IRS installment agreements. Now, the Freddie Mac updates is really, we're probably around 30 days away from it being mandatory, but we're strongly encouraged to incorporate it in how we do it now. Okay, Freddie Mac has enhanced how we're to view borrowers with installment agreements with the IRS that are pending IRS approval. Pending, but not approved. The monthly payment will be determined by the greater of the payment requested by the borrower or the amount of taxes owed divided by 72 months. That could be a killer for some of our, people who have those big tax debts. So if they do not have the agreement approved yet, then we've got to do the math. Whatever they submitted to IRS as their potential payment, whatever's greater between that and the total balance divided by 72 months. Income from alimony, child support, and separate maintenance must be supported by legal binding documentation, which may include, of course, the final court order, divorce decree, or legally binding separation agreement. Legally binding child support agreement or other legally binding documentation and proof of the actual receipt must be validated. Now, historically, we've had to show 6 months receipt of child support. So that still stands, especially on conventional loans. Actually, that's conventional and FHA loans. If your borrower is receiving child support, you want to prove not just the court order, but you got to prove that they've actually been receiving it, because court order is not going to force a deadbeat to pay. So unfortunately, we do need to make sure of that. Now, as far as it goes with appraisals, with appraisal waivers, a new terminology was pretty much implemented earlier this year, and that is you might get a waiver, but it's going to require what's called an ACE or property detail, a PDR, which is a property detail report, which is essentially a desktop appraisal. So if you get an appraisal waiver on your DU or LP, in the body of that report is going to tell you if in fact we have to get that PDR. So if we have to get a PDR, we're going to require an appraisal. It's the path of least resistance. And now we still do get PIWs, property inspection waivers. I had one just last week where it was a straight appraisal waiver, and it didn't require a PDR, property detail report. But if it does require one, because not every investor accepts them to this point, unless your loan is locked and we know where it's going, please anticipate that we will need to get an appraisal. So you run your DU, you see your appraisal waiver box check, don't immediately start dancing in the aisles. Let's read down further to see if in fact those additional supplemental reports are required. Because if we set the proper expectation up front, we don't have to worry about it. So I-Corps will require full appraisal in most cases, in most instances, regardless as the process and investor acceptance will be the determining factor. And the cost of the property detail waiver may not be worth the risk of a post-closing value acceptance issues. and we can go in depth on that, at a later date. So I wanted to make sure, that we touched on income issues, we touched on residency issues, we touched on, occupancy, and we've touched on all these other things. Now, the final thing that I wanted to talk to you guys about is condos. Now, there were some major changes going on with how condos are viewed. Fannie Mae had we had a huge webinar just last week as it pertains to the condos, and I wanted to go over with you some of the stuff that we talked about. Now, the age of condos are the biggest factors when assessing a condo for a client that's purchasing, and you do need to know that because when the older the condos, it's a higher probability that there are special assessments and critical repairs are needed. Now, if in fact, when we do, because the questionnaire is mandatory, when we do that, we get it back and they say that there are any special assessments, that's automatically going to be a trigger that even though a limited review might be granted on the surface of the DU or LP, a full review is going to be required. Now, I will say that in that whole training with Fannie Mae, they, several times said that they aligned directly with Freddie Mac. So although, I introduced this as a Fannie Mae changes, this is a universal change. Now, in doing a full review, it's not something that you guys, as a sales professional, you might not, want to read through and go through all of the details of the financials and all of those things. But there are some key elements that I think that it would be prudent for you to keep your eyes on. Now, when going through, you want to look to see, again, that term, any special assessments. Now, special assessment is repairs, the borrowers, each borrower has to put in, every month, an additional $50 they pay towards a special assessment because to keep, to repair the pool or the landscaping of the complex or something like that. And they are defined in the meat of the document. But when reviewing the financials, if that special assessment does not cover the cost, then that condo may not, that whole development may not be acceptable. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that we are in tune with any projects in need of critical repairs. Now, and it will tell you that on the questionnaire. We have revised, well, it's not we, but industry-wide, there's a revision of what the condo questionnaire looks like and what it says. It's more detailed now to ask these questions. When a condo is subject to a full review, it's going to require a review of the HOA board minutes, any engineer reports, any inspection reports. So it is pretty involved. And more condos, because of the ages, you're gonna see less and less that come through with the limited review. So we want to make sure that we're all cognizant of that. Now, if the HOA does not address any critical repairs, we must obtain optional documents to make that determination. And what does that mean? If in fact it meets a certain age criteria and we see the special assessments are being taken in the budget because the budget is clearly going to state that, then we need to be able to identify what those assessments are for. So that could require an additional inspection. All right. So, again, when you have one, I think the best thing to do is let's review it together when we have a full condo review. And the next time that I have one, I'm gonna save it for us to talk about. This doesn't really pertain to us here, but we do have partners who are doing loans in Florida. If a project is under any type of evacuation order, the condo is ineligible. We're in hurricane season. So any of our sales partners out there that are doing any condos in an area that's challenged by weather or potential evacuations, whether it be fire, flood, or anything like that. If there is an evacuation order in place, that condo is automatically not eligible until that has been lifted and all provisions removed. Now, it does affect us here on the West Coast with, again, like I just said, with fires and things of that nature. So we have to always be in tune with, what the FEMA designation is. And we all watch the weather. We know that if in fact an area is prone to or recently has had an event. Let me see. I've said the term special assessment again, but again, we need to have all special assessments identified. If 15% of the unit owners also, in looking at the financial, if 15% of unit owners are behind in their special assessment payments, then the condo is not eligible, because they're deeming that as now you don't have enough money to pay for either repairs or the necessary upkeep. So we just need to make sure, on condos, keep in mind that the limited review, the easy condo loans, they are going to start, being limited, especially dictated by the age of the unit. So I would say, what is an age that you need to be concerned about? 15 years or greater, especially in light of all of the weather and nature events that we have endured over the last 10 to 15 years. Just keep in mind that anytime that your condo is a little bit older, it might require a little bit more information. So what can we do? I want to get the actual condo questionnaire in your hand so that at the point of impact, at the point of origination, you can go ahead and get that sent. You can get that to the HOA. If you're dealing on a purchase, get it to that listing agent and say, we're going to need this, because the questionnaire is going to categorize everything that's needed. So we won't have to figure it out. It's going to do that. So I plan on getting that in all of you guys' hands by the end of this week. Because I have probably in the last month, I've probably done about 4 or 5 condos. I don't sound like a lot, but this is, we're trendy. 4 or 5 this in August could turn to 8 or 9 in September. So I definitely want to get that to you, and I want you to read over it. And any questions and stuff that you have I'm very communicative. I know I say this every time that we meet. Any questions that you guys have, man, hit me with them, because I tell you, that same question you have, someone else has the same one. And then although I'll respond to you directly, I'm going to share the information with everybody so that we can all get strong. I could go through a whole lot more with condos, but again, it's overkill. It's kind of when I be nerding out and looking and reading through guidelines and stuff. A lot of it may not pertain to, but again, I wanted to spend today to talk to you guys again about some of the things that we're seeing and some changes that are coming down, the pike with the agencies we deal with. So with that said, I wanted to open it back up again. The questions don't have to be necessarily pertaining to what I just discussed. I want to give you guys, we got 15 minutes. I definitely want to discuss or talk about anything that's on your mind that I may be able to help you with. And I guarantee if I don't have the answer ready, then I got a pen and my iPad so that I could take it offline and get that answer for you. But does anyone have any questions internally, externally?
I had a question on the liquidity part.
Okay.
So I know that you mentioned that expenses, right? Expenses usually would have to be drawn from their business account, like debited from their business account. So are you stating that, like, if they do spend expenses, right, on their business account, how do we know if it is a business expense?
Okay. When looking at the bank statements, I don't care about what they spend their money on. I'm only caring about
Oh, I see.
yes, just the deposits. I just want to show business income liquidity. The
Oh,
P&L
I
is going
see.
to tell me how their money is paid, or the balance sheet is going to tell me how it's paid. I just want to show on that bank statement the money's coming in.
Okay, got it. Just more so deposits versus
Correct,
actually what you're spending on and what they're using for their expenses.
correct. Now, I
Okay,
would
got
tell
it.
you, I see a lot of times on bank statements, I see Zelle payments to and from. Well, the to, I don't really care, but Zelle payments in, I can't automatically equate those to business income because, my daughter's in college and I'm Zelling her all the time. So I want to make sure that you guys, when you look at your bank statement, especially on your self-employed borrowers, keep your eye on things like that, Zelle payments, counter deposits, and stuff like that. I can't automatically credit that to business income. So just know that I'm gonna need a story with that. You know,
Oh,
I'm just, you let me know these counter deposits are from, just put a story with it. I'm not gonna tell you what to say, but if you have random deposits and then you have some that's obviously from, the business, I had a truck driver and you could easily see, a lot of payments coming from his, the companies he delivers for, but he also had a lot of counter deposits and what have you. Now, because I couldn't include the counter deposits, then it became an issue with, validating liquidity on FHA on a Freddie Mac loan. But as it turns out, we could easily say, well, he owns other, trucks, and this is their payments, and they're, he's depositing it like that. I just need a story for it. It's not that I've got to. That's what invoices. Yeah, invoices are great, but just keep in mind, guys, when you have a self-employed borrower and it's going Freddie Mac, and I'm not talking Schedule C, guys. I'm talking, S corps and corporations. Just make sure that you're looking at those bank statements too, because I do want to be able to see that that's where it's coming from. And
yeah,
speaking
because
of,
I have a client right now with they're a barber, but they make basically a boatload of money from their barber business, but a lot of them are Zelle deposits.
right, but again,
So,
as a barber, that's an easy explanation because a barber, it's common. I don't have
oh,
a
okay,
barber anymore, but that's kind of to pay for, via Zelle. I mean, it's for real. You know,
okay,
that makes a lot of sense. See, that's what I mean, a story behind it. Make it make sense,
got
because
it,
it makes sense to you, then I can make it make sense externally. I
got it.
definitely can. That's a good one. That's a good one. Speaking of bank statements, guys, one thing that I want to remind you guys, when we're looking at them, when I say we, I mean myself and our operational partners, I'm not just looking for your deposits and the debts paid. I am literally looking to see if there are payments made, to specific entities consistently that don't show up on your credit report. Okay, because those have to be added into the debt ratio. Had an FHA loan, this was last year, that could have blown up on us. Thank God we had enough room in there. They had, and if you guys remember when Hayel was here, I struggled with this name before, carousel. Anyway, they had these payments to this place where that does in-store financing. Well, it wasn't on the credit report, but every 1 month it was $280. The next month it was 260 or 290, but it was to this same entity every month, and it wasn't on the credit report. I had to add that debt to the credit report, and it could have blown the debt ratio. That was last year, and since then, I am keenly aware, and I want you to be as well. When we're analyzing bank statements, we're not just analyzing it for deposit for your SSI to prove your pension, or in this case, approve liquidity. We are looking to see if there are any debts, there are any recurring debts that I mean, it's not recurring Zells or not, credit card statements that's on the debt ratio or to Ralph's or grocery stores. I'm talking about to potential creditors that do not report. We have to be in tune with that, because really and truly 99.9% of the loans we do, that ratio is on tilt. He can't take another penny. So let's just make sure that we're inspecting those bank statements really, really closely. Really closely. Additional addresses on credit reports. We want to make sure. Now, again, we talk about 2 years consistently, but we also want to make sure excuse me, that if there are any additional addresses on the credit report, because a lot of times I'm getting the LOEs for, the LOEs with the submission. Well, make sure that, you're looking at the addresses as well, because we need to know not just that, okay, this is where I used to live. We need to know that they don't have any continuing financial obligation. It's a little housekeeping thing, but just make sure that, your LOEs are complete, guys. There's no real shortcuts, because, I don't want to condition for something that would make you have to go back to the borrower. I know how important it is, to not just to maintain that client, but to have that client want to recommend you. And the least amount of times you got to go back to that borrower and setting that proper expectation that sets you up for referral business. And I'm keenly aware of that. And that's why I do my best to condition. I don't condition outside of DU and LP unless it's absolutely necessary. And if and when I do, there's an explanation behind it. You might not agree with it, but there will be an explanation behind any time that I condition outside of LP or DU. All right. Any more questions?
We're talking about payment plans. You talked about payment plans. Is it still the same with FHA? You have to have three payments, and conventional is one payment on your IRS payment plans.
Yes. Yeah. So Darshan was asking me as far as it goes with the payment plans. We do definitely need to see. We're going to stick that the borrower has made at least three payments, unless of course it's recent. If they just started it 2 months ago, then only one payment is due. But as long as it is approved by the IRS, then and we're included in the debt ratio. I have made a case for that when 3 have been required. We just, the key now and the main focus is that it can't be a potential payment plan. It has to be validated and approved by the IRS. And if it is not, doesn't mean it's disqualified. That just means that calculation changes. And that is across every agency. Either the greater of what your planned payment is, or 72, or the balance divided by 72.
Darryl, you touch base on FHA hourly people when we get paycheck, they show like 37 hours, 36.
All right, good point. Javier was just saying, what about our FHA borrowers or borrowers in general who don't work 40 hours? They're full time, but their pay stubs we show 36 hours on one, 39 on the other. Any time that we do not have what's proof of full-time employment of 40 hours, then the calculation goes back to what they made the previous 2 years, guys. So I will tell you that if in fact they work less than 40 hours and they've gotten an increase this year, then you got to verify how many hours they worked last year, and I apply those hours by the amount of their increase. So the work number doesn't tell us when they got their last increase. So if you're looking at pay stubs and it's an FHA loan, and the 2 pay stubs you look at are less than 40 hours averaging a week, then automatically ask for, we're going to need, state, and it can't be where we're doing the math, deducting, dividing the W-2 by the hourly rate. No, we can't do that. We literally need to have proof of the amount of hours worked the previous year, and then we multiply that by the new rate. Since the work number does not give you that, then you can tell your borrower you're going to need, either I'm talking when I say when work number doesn't give their last increase, the borrower is going to have to prove when they got their last increase. Now we can, they can fill out a standard handwritten VOE, which gives us that information in box 12 or 14. But just keep in mind that we are going to need to verify what their hourly rate is. If that same hourly rate was the same as last year, then we're going to be using the last 12 to 24 months to calculate that income. So the moral of the story is if that pay stub is less than 40, see if in fact they got one that is 40 within the necessary time frame, and get me one, or give me 2 at 40 hours. If they flat out don't work 40 hours, you got work to do. And if you set that expectation up front, then it's a lot easier for our borrowers to digest. So Yeah, that was a good one. Keep in mind, guys, that the income calculations, they do vary, with a little bit with with Fannie and Freddie, but FHA's income calculations is a lot different. Okay, Cheryl says, I saw it and it popped down. Okay. So how about a nurse or doctor that they are full-time but do 3 shifts of 12 hours each week and 36 hours per week? If that is FHA, the same rule applies. If that is Fannie or Freddie and we can show that, then we can use the averages. FHA is again, doctors, nurses, pilots, a lot of them are on time restrictions because of the nature of their work. If in fact that, in this case that you just said, where if it's a nurse or a doctor that does 312s, if we can get something from, and I don't know exactly off the top what it is, that is their full-time hours allotted, and then that is something that is typical of that industry, I fight for that. But on the surface, just know if it's under 40 hours per week, guys, we're gonna need to know how many hours they worked the previous 12. And if you're using overtime, FHA, any type of additional income other than your base salary, of course, your base salary also does include any sick time, vacation. But if they get bonus or overtime, and it is FHA, I don't care what they made year to date. The only thing that I care about year to date is they're still receiving it. The calculation is going to be an average of the previous 2 years or the previous 12 months. If it was less in 22 than it was in 21. So let me repeat that for the people in the back. If the borrowers receive bonus or overtime or commissions, and it's an FHA loan, their year-to-date earnings is not a part of the calculation. It's what they've made over the previous 2 years or 1 year if the most recent year is less than the previous. That's huge, because I know, I've gotten, it's countless times where, the calculation includes a year to date. That doesn't matter. And consequently on FHA loans, if in fact they get an hourly rate and my pay stubs show that they work 40 hours, then I'm going to take their hourly rate times 40, as opposed to, having to prove that they got an increase. So whereas if they got an increase, and I'm under 40, then I've got to, apply the hours worked the previous year. But if their pay stubs show 40 hours and, and whatever their hourly rate is on their pay stub, then I could take the hourly rate times the full-time hours. So I don't have to go with year to date and previous year. The only time that becomes a factor is if the year to date or if 22 is less than 2021. So anytime there's any disparity like that, then we're just going to need an explanation. It ain't going to affect my calculation as long as I got a 40-hour pay stub, 2 of them. But if in fact it's less than previous, you just need a story. I was out, my wife, had a baby, or not just if it was a male, but the wife, she had a baby, or you had one, or whatever the case may be. Just make sure that we have a story behind it. If in fact the previous year is less than the former. All right, going through a lot. This is good. Does anyone have any other questions before we sign off? All right.
Yes, quick question.
Go ahead.
How do you know whether to use the 24 or the 12 month for when they have variable hours? Is it just if they had a recent raise, then you can use the 12 months?
Correct. If they had a recent raise, then I would use the hours over the previous 12 months. If in fact, the hours are, I was going to say if the hours are less than, but if they were less this year than the previous, then I could potentially average, but it's just going to depend. But I'm looking at the most recent 12 months if they've had an increase, because another part of that mindset is they had an increase this year, they had one the previous year, so then it wouldn't be fair for me to use those numbers, but I can use the hours worked.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. I will do my best to summarize some of the things that we talked about and then send out, FAQs or something like that by the end of this week. But anytime that I have, a talk like this is stuff that's born from the files that I've underwritten. Now, what I would like I said before, I'm gonna do tax returns next month. And I'm gonna have one out and I'm gonna show you my calculation, and then I'm gonna show you how our third party calculates it as well. Because I just think, like I said, knowledge is power. If you're looking at that tax return first and something jumps out at you, then you're going to be able to ask that question, ahead of time, so that the borrower is not surprised by it. You guys know my email, dking@iCore If there's any question that you have and you're too chicken to say it in front of an audience, you can come to me directly. I'll definitely, answer any question. And in my email, it also has my my phone numbers as well. I welcome any and all communications so that I can give you guys any unfair advantage I can, because you're already awesome. I just want to add to it, and that's on the real. So thank you guys for your time. It's always a pleasure. Hopefully that some of the rambling I did help you guys a bit. And if you have any topics that you want me to cover in future meetings, by all means, just let me know, and I will do my best to put together something that covers all your questions. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you, Darryl.
Thank you, Darryl.
End it.